Hello.
Hello.
Hey, Sherry, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Testing. Testing.
Special Board of Education meeting to order at 7:04 and ask us to please stand and pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I will ask us to remain standing just very briefly. Unfortunately, our community has lost a former first grade Chatfield student and a 2019 Seymour High School graduate. So a moment of silence, please. Okay, thank you. Okay, our first agenda item is the discussion of the data-driven action plan to present ways and ideas to get as many students back to school as soon as possible. I'm going to indicate to all of us the procedure I would like to use for this, and I will ask Mrs. Tenza to present a review, and then I'm going to allow board members to ask one question at a time, please. You can do a clarifying question. And then I will come around again and again until we satisfy all of us. That way there would be only fair that each of the board members can ask a first question before somebody asks a second, and so forth, a second question before somebody can ask a third. So I'm going to ask us to honor that request. So Mrs. Tenza, if you would please begin.
Sure. So I'm sure, I will do a recap. I did send the plan. The board charged the superintendent with the development and presentation of a plan no later than December 18th for discussion at this special meeting prior to January 11th for ways to present ideas and strategies to get as many students back into school as possible, including models that bridged the full remote and the hybrid model that we currently have in place and that pay close attention to maximizing in-person learning, especially for students who are struggling. So in the superintendent's absence, because he's out ill, that charge fell to me, and I worked extensively with our leadership team over several sessions and several hours of time. And those members were Stacy Albertson, Becky Bennett, Chris Boyle, Cindy Brooks, Tim Connors, Ernie DeStacy, Rob Dyer, Mary Sue Feige, Kathleen Freemuth, Jim Freund, Sherry Holmes, Rich Kearns, Paul Lucky, David Alekna, Lauren Reed, Jody Roden, myself, and unavailable for the first meeting, but definitely in consultation through phone calls and with Jessica, still, well, now Christy, married Naugatuck Valley, and Michael Wilson as well. So just to give you a little bit of context, we've been working in a hybrid model, and our reopening plan from August has been in place. And a great deal of information has been learned about what is working across the state. And we have seen, some districts, many districts successfully start to bring in more students in in-person learning. We have watched the Department of Public Health present various pieces of information and data points that have shifted as time has gone by. Commitments to addendum for many addendums from the state, but one of their addendums that they offered guidance to, they have since, lifted some lines and kind of blurred the continuum. Connecticut was a state that originally chose the Harvard model of a threshold of 25 for, like the red zone. Other states picked different models. Connecticut happened to pick that model. And recently, the Department of Education has stressed that that's only a recommendation, not a rule to be, applied unilaterally. And it needs to be flexible and in conjunction with other factors, including your mitigation strategies, what's going on in your exact town, as well as even small things like your building ability to sustain numbers, as well as your staffing needs. So there's a lot of pieces in your own district that go into that decision. So given all the information, we worked very closely and we came up with a commitment plan to add extension phases to our current hybrid plan. So what I'd like to do is just briefly outline for the board and the community that's listening, those phases so that they can understand what we are hoping to achieve. So the decision to reopen January 19th was made with a great deal of input from the Board of Education chair and vice chair, the new first select woman Department of Public Health representatives from our own Naugatuck Valley, that we would remain closed until January 19th. And in fact, I did do a lot of research. While there are some districts still open, there is a long list of towns that are moving to that same target date, with the considerations of families that are likely going to cross state borders and or get together in larger gatherings just by nature of the holiday season. And that provides a bit of a safety barrier for any potential uptick during a time where we all realize right now our numbers across the state and the country are higher than they have been really since this began. With that said, we are willing to commit to try to make every effort to reopen January 19th in our current hybrid model and include the following phases. So January 19th, when we reopen, we would reopen in our current hybrid model, and we would invite a large selected group of high needs students that cross a few different categories. And we spent quite a bit of time identifying those categories of high numbers of special education services, ELL, high learning needs for ELL performance, students who are on the chronically absenteeism trend, students who are failing multiple subjects across the board and or standards, so at the elementary level. So we cross-analyzed and identified, and the board can see in the plan, the numbers range we're looking to add. We currently do have students that attend 4 days a week in our high needs population that I wasn't sure the board was aware of, but we have had them for many, many weeks. But we are looking to add approximately 120 to 180 students if their families accept that in that high needs population for those first 2 weeks at the end of January. So we have some work to do with community reach out, informing the community, and then trying to get feedback from those parents on whether or not they're interested in joining that 4-day-a-week model. The next phase that we would be looking at would be the week of February 1st. We would then look to invite back all interested pre-K 5 families. So that would be all of our elementary students plus all of the high needs students district-wide would now be in our buildings 5 days a week. At that point, the Wednesdays would become in-person for everybody, but they would remain early release days for professional learning. And we would, continue to apply the mitigating strategies that we outlined and closely monitor that information with our next tentative deadline. This one's a little bit more difficult to pin down. We're looking at the week after February break, that little mini February break. It's changed since when I was little. It used to be a whole week. But we are looking at that to bring back our 6-12 from their hybrid model to full in-person if they wish to. That one's a little bit more difficult because it's very hard to cohort. It's impossible to cohort middle school and high school students to the extent that you can the elementary level. Those phases, do require us to have all of our overlapping mitigating strategies. So it's not just a mask. It's not just maximizing social distancing. It's not just using your seating charts to carefully monitor who's sitting where. It's all of those pieces and, careful vigilance along those respects. So in a nutshell, the charge of the board was to please provide layers that you think you can sustain. And these layers were identified as feasible from the leadership team for reporting to in-person learning, providing that the supporting data in COVID cases, and the feedback from the whole local health and officials indicated that they're under control. I don't know how much further you'd like me to go into detail or.
Well, if you're satisfied, then we can open it to questions. If you're satisfied with your presentation, Mrs. Tenza.
I think that there are many things to consider. I think that when we invite people back, I think that we will by nature have some families that say, I appreciate you trying to increase population. I am not interested in taking you up on that invitation at the time. And in all of those efforts, our administrators would reach out with conversations with those families to try to explain the benefits, not to persuade, because that's a very individual choice. And people have very specific reasons, health or otherwise, that they may be choosing to not come into school. But our administrators would be reaching out to our high needs students, as well as that next round of population at the elementary level, to see if they're interested. We do think that perhaps the number of families who are currently in a hybrid model has the potential to increase a full distance learning model. If that should occur at this point in the year, when relationships have been established and built with the students and their teachers and their peers, we would then be suggesting to our teachers that the students who are currently in a hybrid model, if they do not want to come back full time, they would embrace the distance learning on those days with their current teacher. They would not go to a separate distance learning teacher. We use that model at the beginning of the year, and we'll maintain that model with those relationships that exist now. But any new students who wish to go to full remote because they're not comfortable with health statistics or for whatever reason, we would encourage that connection with the group that they've already formed their connections with, because it's important for us. The relationships are what allow learning to occur. So I think that's an important piece to understand. I think that it's important for the community who may be listening to know, and again, we will post lots of information, and we have lots of community communications that we need to prepare, that if you have children in full distance learning now that want to come back, we'd love to have them, and we will make sure that our buildings are safe. And if you are not comfortable with sending your children, that we will absolutely, this year the governor has provided that temporary full distance learning option, and we would honor that as well. We want to work with our families to try to get as many students in safely as we can. We would obviously be adding back in some of the desks. We won't be adding back in all of the furniture. We need to be able to leave space to maximize social distancing. And with things like lunch and snacks, we may be having to utilize alternate different spaces than we have in the past. To date, children may have been eating in their classroom. When increased numbers arise, we may need to have a portion of our student bodies eating in one space, a classroom, and the other space might be, the cafeteria or the library or another space. We are looking at creative ways to, approach things like snack. If you used to have 7 kids in a room, it was able to socially distance and take your mask off and have a snack with maybe 12 or 13 or 14 or even more students in a room. It may be that you have to space out accordingly and have some students remove their mask, have their snack while the others leave their mask on, and then alternate that so that not everybody has their mask off. during the same time. These are all practices that are being used across the state. I've spent a lot of time over the last 2 weeks trying to really dig into what is working in some of the districts where at least the elementary students have been able to go to school more frequently in a regular basis.
Okay. Mrs. Bruno, would you like to begin?
Sure. And I was able to ask some questions in advance, and I thank you for those answers. And I appreciate the time and the research and the thought that went into the plan. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Knowing it's a busy time of year. My question would be, will families have the option for full-time in person and or remote? Will the current hybrid be an option for families as well if they wanted to stay in the 2-day-a-week?
So I think that it's a very natural progression for some families. Some families, I think, are screaming, let us all back in. and interestingly enough, we had other families thanking us, saying, thank you for keeping all of our children safe and not having us in right now. I think that could be very appropriate for some families. And again, if that's their choice, they would again remain with their current teacher. Yeah, we want to be able to work and make this happen.
All set with that response, Mrs. Bruno?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Champagne.
Hi. One of the questions I had, I have a few, but I'll just do the one at a time. One of the things that sticks out to me is more or less a concern that speaks to the funding source for the second half of the year for the distance learning teachers. If we see a vast increase in people opting to go full distance, to me it looks like we're capping the size of the full distance learning classes, and I believe that we hired these teachers for the whole year. Why do we have an issue with the second half?
Mrs. Tenza?
Sure, this is Mrs. Tenza. Mr. Champagne, I'm going to try to answer the first portion of your question, and then I did ask Mrs. Holmes, our business manager, to attend to try to address the second half of the question. Our current full distance learning classes, many of them are at or close within 1 or 2 students to our contractual language for being full for our I don't want to call them regular teachers because nobody's really regular, everybody's special, but for the current teachers that are teaching in the building. So basically those classes in many cases are almost full. And in other cases, the other part of that, Mr. Champagne, is that if I take a class out of Mr. Tenza's classroom in 3rd grade for full distance learning and assign them to a full distance learning teacher, it's a brand new teacher and brand new students. So at this point in the year, those relationships have been built. So what we'd like to do is keep our temporary full distance learning teachers whom we hired and pretty much have full classes with that cohort, unless they wish to start to come back. Anybody new who is not comfortable, we would like to try to keep them with their current teacher and peers, because those relationships and understandings of where those students are academically, socially, and emotionally have already been established. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, it does.
Okay. So I'm going to turn the second part over to Mrs. Holmes, and I'm going to close my screen for just a second, but I'll be right back. Go ahead, Sherry, please.
Yep. And the second part is because the coronavirus relief fund grant is ending December 30th. So we are only allowed to take 5 months of those distant learning teachers' salaries and benefits and take it out of that grant, which is the grant number 2 that we spoke of. So currently right now, I am talking to All Star Transportation and negotiating a discounted rate for transportation to help us out with that funding to assure that we have enough money in the budget to fund the distant learning teachers to June 30th and 2021. The other grant number 1, is ending, it's a full year grant, so it's ending on June 30th, 2021. I've asked for a revision to that grant to allow it to become all salaries so that a portion of the distant learning teacher salaries can be taken out of that grant, thus reducing the amount that we have to come up with and the balance that I'm negotiating. And when it's finalized, I will let you know. With All-Star Transportation, we'll have the distant learning teachers covered for the full year.
Okay.
So that right now it's in the works, and when it's finalized, I will give a complete analysis on that and how that's going to work.
So was this something that was known when we decided to hire these teachers for the full year? Because my worry is, as we start to pull out children from the full distance teachers, are we at any point at a risk of maximizing the classroom to that I believe it's that 25 students in a class? Because it sounds to me like the distance learning teachers are now, we're capping them at a certain number. Like they're never going to go up.
The distance learning teachers, this is Mrs. Tenza again. The distance learning teachers are capped at their contractual, which for most grades, I believe is 30. I think it's pre-K, K and 1 might be, it's lower than that. So we would cap them at 30, just like we would any other teacher. As those children begin to come back into the regular classrooms, it is perfectly feasible, highly unlikely perhaps, but perfectly feasible that, one, or I guess even all of our distance learning teachers could suddenly be child-free, in which case they are under contract with us for the year. They would immediately become part of our instructional resource base, whether they're serving as instructional tutors, breaking out small groups into large classrooms that are already, maybe like you said, lots of children, building substitutes for the teachers maybe who are unable to come in because they're quarantining or ill. There's a variety of ways that those teachers would be used, and used well and appropriately to forward learning. But right now their rooms are full. We anticipate that more and more parents are going to wish for their children to be out for a little bit until things settle. And if that's the case, they could be home, but they would just be remaining with their current teacher and current peers.
Okay, Chris, does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Garofalo, you're next.
Yeah, I've been struggling with exactly how I want to phrase my question. So bear with me. I'm going to try and be as succinct as possible. In your deliberations with the other administrators of the buildings and the other individuals whom you mentioned earlier, were you dealing with established criteria for students who are struggling? And I ask that because based on your remarks in your presentation earlier, the invitation that you're offering for students to come back and be part of whatever mode you decide, are those the students whom you could identify as genuinely having struggled since the onset of this change in how we're doing business?
This is Mrs. Tenza. I think you articulated that question very well. And so in the plan, we did outline several considerations that we established, and it started with a great deal of research that I did and put forth to an individual meeting with Dr. Boyle at first. So I'll let Dr. Boyle address how we narrowed, not even really narrowed, but kind of further defined our criteria so that it was data-based and driven on highest needs first. So Dr. Boyle, if you would not mind addressing that question, I know you can do it very confidently.
I appreciate that. This is Chris Boyle, Director of Pupil Services. To start with, I've been in communication with each of the building administrators as well as the special education teachers throughout this whole process. So I already had a preliminary idea of what students were struggling the most. What I then did was I pulled all the student data for every single student with an IEP throughout the district and looked for students that had similar profiles to the names that I was already hearing about. I looked at things like the number of hours of special education service per week. I looked at things like paraprofessional support, factors like that. And based on that, I came up with a preliminary list of students that had a similar profile. I then passed that list of students on to the building administrators for their further evaluation, since they work with the entire population on an everyday basis. And we further defined students that were disenfranchised, students with attendance needs, things like that that don't necessarily readily appear on an IEP, so that we had a multiple phases of data analysis before we came up with the list that we did for the students that really we would want to see back 4 days a week, pending parent approval.
Mr. Garfalo, satisfied?
May I ask a follow-up question, Mr. Chairman?
Sure you may, as long as it's a follow-up. Yep.
Given Dr. Boyle's explanation, I would ask, in offering this invitation, have we been forceful enough? Maybe that's not the right word. Have we been convincing enough, might be a better word, to parents of the need for their particular child or children, such as may be the case, to afford themselves of the invitation that we're making to have them come back and thereby improve the quality of their education and hopefully their success?
Do you want to let Mr. Boyle answer that, Mrs. Tenza, or would you like
I do.
Go ahead, Dr. Boyle.
Well, certainly throughout this entire school year, we've been in communication with families. There's a balance that we have to strike between us advocating to families that, that they're all the kids would benefit from being in full time, but, particularly those students that are struggling the most, that what benefit would they gain from being in the building versus also trying to respect their right that the State Department of Education has given families that they could voluntarily opt for this distance learning. But, it doesn't absolve us of our responsibility, even though families have this right, for us just to have these ongoing communications, making sure that we're breaking down barriers, making sure that there's no misunderstanding, make sure parents are well informed of what protocols that we're following, so that when parents do, for those families that have made the option to voluntarily opt for distance learning, that it's a well-informed decision on their end. That being said, when we came up with this list of students that we want to invite in again, we went right back to the drawing board with all students again. So we have not excluded anybody from this list that may have already opted for voluntarily opted for distance learning. We didn't make an assumption that, well, they've already made their decision, we're not going to invite them again. We're going to invite them again because, I think that is our responsibility. So I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that response, Mrs. Tenza.
Hi, this is Mrs. Tenza again. Only Mr. Garfalo that we haven't invited this next phase of people yet, again, formally. We're starting with you. So that work would start soon, but it didn't start yet because this is the first time the community is even hearing about this.
Mr. Garfalo, you all set?
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Ms. Harmling.
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Kristen Harmeling, and my question is for Mrs. Tenza. Could you give clarity around, given what you've proposed this evening, are there specific metrics that you're waiting to change to implement this plan, or is this a go-forward plan with the numbers, generally speaking, as they are right now?
That's a good question. This is a go forward January 19th as committed to the town and the community, pending any government, right? Saying if the governor says you're done, you're done. If our numbers, and again, I don't want to put a qualitative statement on it, but if we find out through some of our work and our research that 67% of our faculty traveled over the holidays and had a wonderful time, I'm so glad for them. But now if they're quarantining and they can't teach, then even though we might be allowing them to teach from home if they're healthy, we still have to have an adult in the room to watch. So pending any unforeseen circumstances like that, which we do not know, this plan is our full commitment to try in these phases to reopen January 19th.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Strello, one quick related follow-up.
Okay, as long as it's not a different topic. As long as it's
That's why I called it a follow-up.
Okay, go ahead.
So that means we're not waiting for any decline to happen. Say if everything stayed status quo, we're looking to implement this plan.
So the answer to that, this is Mrs. Tenza, is yes, but.
Okay.
So now here's the but. The but is that right now, while we are not in-person learning, or not even in hybrid person learning, we have every reason to believe that not every family member is reporting every case to us. You all know through those emails that come out that we report to you when there is a case. We have very strong evidence that indicates that we are not getting every case reported to us. They're coming through a child saying to a teacher, oh, Vonda's not on because she's got the Rona, right? Like, and I don't want to be casual about it because it's a very serious thing. So pending what we know right now, the answer is yes. And Becky would be the first one to say, and we talked with Jess, married named Christy, from Naugatuck Valley Friday. The days are blurring, and she said the same thing. People are not reporting right now because we're not in session. Should we return to in session and find something that we had no idea was happening, that might alter some of our decisions or slow down some pieces. But we want to open our doors January 19th, and we want to open them to our current hybrid model and those increased population students, and then move forward with the phases.
Thank you very much.
As appropriate.
Thank you, Mrs. Strello.
Oh, you're welcome. Just a follow-up. I did notice a communication, Mrs. Tenza, with you and Mrs. Bennett concerning a meeting on the 22nd, which is tomorrow, with the Valley Health.
8 a.m.
8 a.m. Will that provide us any further information to your knowledge? Either one, Mrs. Tenza,
So,
Mrs. Bennett?
I'll turn that to
nodding her
Mrs.
head?
That's a good question, Mr. Smello. I'll turn that to Mrs. Bennett. The reason I mentioned that one is because there are some new guidelines regarding maybe shortening some quarantine periods that the state of Connecticut and the superintendents want to discuss with the Department of Health. And until we put forward any recommendations to you, we really want to hear from the experts on what their thinking is. And I am not a health expert. So that, I believe, is going to be a focus of tomorrow's discussion. It does not impact our plan. It might impact our quarantining piece that we would then need to re-communicate out. And I don't think that they're saying you don't need to quarantine. If anything, I think, and Becky can talk about this, they might be shortening it a few days. So I'll let, if that's your pleasure, Mr. Stromello, I'll let.
I'll let Mrs.
our head
Bennett
nurse.
respond at this time. Go
Sure.
ahead,
Mrs.
Bennett.
Becky Bennett is our head nurse. Go ahead, Becky.
Sure. Hi. Good evening, everyone. The DPH calls we've been doing, actually, Michael and I have been doing for the past couple months. They're every Tuesday morning, 8 o'clock. They're about an hour and a half, and they go over what's going on in Connecticut. One of the big things that they're going to discuss tomorrow is how they want to change the guidelines with the quarantine. I'm sure you've heard about it. Either it's going to be they're still highly recommending and promoting the 14-day quarantine. However, there is now going to be a 10-day quarantine, but you still have to monitor for symptoms. And if you're symptomatic, then you still have to stay in quarantine and you have to meet certain quarantine to get out. Now, they're also talking about offering one that after your 5th day of quarantine, you can go get a PCR test, at which point you need to wait for that test to come back negative, and then you can opt out of quarantine early, but still need to be monitored. The problem is that they are still finding that people are transmitting the virus on the 11th day. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of controversy on this. Jessica and I have had multiple talks about maybe adhering just one to try to keep it specific, but we're waiting for further data and clarity from the state tomorrow on exactly what the DPH and the state are proposing and what they're accepting and not. And they said they were going to give us a lot of clarification on that tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Hatfield. Mr. Hatfield.
Yes, I'm here.
It's your turn for a question.
Oh, I'm okay right now. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I appreciate Mrs. Tenza's FAQ. I really appreciate that and taking the time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hatfield. I thought it was a great idea.
Okay, Mr. Kubik.
Hi, just a clarification from Vonda, right? When you said, Vonda, I know I had spoken earlier to you about this, but I just want to make sure everyone understands that when you said 180 students coming back full-time on the 19th of January, in addition to the hybrids, that's 180 approximately per school, correct?
Yes, and in the plan, there was a chart, the highest need students that we identified. So when we come back on the 19th, all hybrid students would be coming back on that Monday, Tuesday, and actually it's Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, because there's no Wednesday that week. In addition would be the students that have already been attending 4 days a week, and it would be an additional approximately 113 at Bungie, 155 at Chatfield, 125 at the middle school, 188 at the high school. That's in addition to the current hybrid students.
Right, so that's just short of half of the current population.
It could be. I mean, district-wide, we're at 2,100. So, when you're looking at your buildings, I would say it's close, yes. With the hybrid students, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Mrs. Mysteriak.
Sure, this is Beth Mysteriak. Thank you, Vonda, for all your hard work and the team for the plan. I think it was very well done. Just as given the public is listening to this, could you just talk to, and I think it was one of the FAQs, but could you just talk to some of the improvements that you have suggested as kind of lessons learned from our previous when we were in schools in terms of how we handle quarantining and kind of the procedures in terms of managing those with contact, et cetera? I know that was in the plan, but from a public's perspective, I think people are asking those questions.
Sure. I think one of the things that we want to make sure that we always do whenever you step away from something for a period of time, and Becky and I had talked about this extensively, is you want to do a recalibration. So one of the things that we would definitely do when our administrators are back in the building or even back virtually is to retrain ourselves on our contact tracing procedures and the importance of seating plans so that we're not over quarantining large groups of people. So that's important. It's important. We would have to have our bus drivers, have specific seating charts. That will be new. And even some of their procedures on loading from the back forward and having siblings sit together. The minute we start to increase populations, seating charts become important, even for little things like snack or what have you. So, it doesn't just apply to students, though. It's important that our staff understand these procedures because we know that the virus does spread and it's it's serious for everybody, but it tends to be much more serious for adults. So we have to make sure that our teachers are not congregating in the teacher's room without their masks on, right? The same rules apply for the teachers. We are looking at things like I had mentioned before, maybe rotating some snack breaks and things like that. We've talked about, masks, even in areas like PE for non aerobic activities, perhaps. And, just again, maintaining all of the same procedures that we have in place for maximizing social distancing. It's the layers. It's really the layers of mitigating strategies that we have to have in place because there's no one blanket solution that is the answer. If there was, everybody would be following it. So I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Stanek.
Hi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do not have any questions. Board members, thanking.
Could you repeat that, Mr. Stanek? It wasn't clear at first.
I would like to echo several of the comments made by other board members, thanking Mrs. Tenza and the staff for their hard work in developing this plan. It appears to me that it was well thought out. And I understand and I realize that this is probably the greatest challenge that our staff has faced in their educational years. And I thank you, all of you. I have no questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to pass on my questions at this time and move back again to Mrs. Bruno if she would like to ask another question. Round two.
I would just ask for families in planning, when we talk about the phases happening in February, at the beginning of February with pre-K to 5 and mid-February, if there's going to be like a date that they can expect that either it's going to go forward or it's not. Can we be upfront about that with families?
Mrs. Tenza?
Yes, so we very much, it's so interesting. I've spent so much time at night, calling all of my me's and other districts, my cohort group. And some of them are like, never give a date. Like, oh, you gotta give a date. I think dates are important, but we have to understand that they're not cut in stone. So we have talked about, sharing this information with you, the board and the community that's listening first, give it a few days to digest. Many folks are off, almost everybody in the district's off next week, but I would be sending out, with Michael's guidance, superintendent's guidance, a communication to the entire community on the 28th, sharing, as Mr. Hatfield had suggested, pull the meat out of the plan. So sharing the meat, sharing the broad parameters of the phases, and the hard work of starting to specifically notify, invite, and have conversations with that initial cohort, that phase that would come in for phase 1 would begin January 4th. We would resend it out for everybody who just didn't have time to read it on the 4th. We would send out a very short couple of questions, like 3 tops, maybe, survey to those targeted individuals on the 6th with a response by the 8th, and then start to do a lot of that legwork. There's extensive legwork that needs to be done. Our bus routes would need to revert back to original bus routes. Communications would need to be, provided to families. You're going to get on these days, but not these days, even if the bus is going by. There's a lot of work to do. And all of my administrators, I'm hoping, are taking the entire week of the holiday off. So I cannot expect anybody to do any of that starting until January 4th.
Mrs. Bruno?
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Champagne, second question.
Thank you, Chris Champagne. So, in looking through the plan that was sent out, we had spoken, or it was mentioned that in regards to the lunches and whatnot, additional mass breaks and things like that. In the FAQ that you had sent out, one of the things that kind of took me aback was silent lunch breaks, silent snack breaks. If we have kids in the building and hoping that as we move out of the hybrid or into larger class sizes, I don't know how anyone could expect kids to take their mask off and be quiet when they haven't seen their friends in months.
So agreed. There's, when the question was out there, what strategies are being used? Those are all different considerations. And what I believe was meant by that, I did not pen that, I typed it, but what I believe was meant by that was very often, especially at the younger level, but not necessarily, sometimes during a snack break, a story is being shown that's read aloud. So it's not a silent snack break, it's students listening to a piece of a story, or, even a mitigating strategy. I know when I helped do lunch duty when we were short-staffed up at the middle school last year or the year prior, sometimes it would be showing just a couple of TED Talks, or, just something where kids aren't talking as much. They're eating and then they're listening. I agree with you, Mr. Champagne. We can't put kids back together and not expect them to talk. It's counterproductive.
I agree. I just a quick, not so much a question, but I have heard from parents that, and teachers as well, that they're being told that lunches and snacks on both sides of town will be silent. So I just hope we can clarify that going forward.
This is Mrs. Tenza, and I will be looking into that because I had not heard that.
Okay, you all set now, Mr. Champagne?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Garofalo.
I have
Number 2.
none at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Harmling, number 2.
I'm all set. Thank you, Mr. Stramello.
Okay, Mr. Hatfield.
I'm okay, Mr. Trammell. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kubik. Mr. Kubik.
And I'm sorry, I stepped away.
Okay. Do you have a second question, Mr. Kubik?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Mrs. Nesteriak, excuse me.
Whatever. Either way, Ed, I'll answer.
No. I can never do whatever. I got myself in big trouble here.
We're all going to go by Mrs. Just a clarification, Vonda, I think that when we communicate this out, I didn't get, when I first read it, that phase 1 included returning back to hybrid, and maybe that was because I just read it really quickly, but I would just clarify that so it's crystal clear for parents. That along with the idea of...
I just want to make a note. I don't want to forget.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. Okay.
Just that, I mean, it's intuitive now that I thought about it, but it just didn't stand out to me. And I think the other thing is that just clarification around if students want to stay full remote, I think I read that they would stay with their current teachers, correct?
Yes, we will need to re-clarify that and really communicate that and over communicate that, because that is a slight alteration from what we started with the year, right? Things are constantly fluid and fluctuating.
So just two comments on that.
We have lots of communications that we need to be able to get out. I think at this type of a year, saturation and predictability. So every Friday, a predictable update, as well as saturation on changes, I think in multiple avenues, is a way to attempt. There's always going to be somebody who misses it.
Sure.
Sometimes it's me.
Me included. And the simpler, the better. I think that,
Agreed.
we are all overwhelmed with a lot of different things right now. And so even
Agreed.
if it has to be small nuggets over
Agreed.
multiple things, but just thank you for that.
Agreed. And the bulk of what we put together, what I put together and sent to you, I realize is way more than what needs to be in a plan. But I think it's important that you see the rationale behind it so that you know the thinking.
Absolutely. Thank
That's
you
the
so
way I
much.
work. Yep.
Okay, Mr. Stanek.
I have no questions.
Okay. I'll ask my question now, but it's interesting that Mrs. Sterek said about it being simple. I can remember way back when I was in principal, I learned that one page is enough for a monthly newsletter because the second page gets lost or ripped off, or people don't read the second page. So you need to be able to get everything done in one page. So
I can do that.
You're absolutely right. My question would be more for Sherry. When I'm looking at, and it's a monetary question having to do with the nurse health techs. You didn't address where we would be providing funding to continue with those.
The health aides, you mean?
Yes, yes.
Okay, the health aides were hired based on only a half a year. So they go along with the grant.
Okay.
So their salaries are all covered by that coronavirus grant, number 2. So that's covered. We were
Okay.
very upfront and we put it all in writing. When we hired them, they knew they were only going to be here for a half a year.
Okay, but there is on the form, on the plan, Mrs. Holmes, that recommend that the nurse health techs be extended beyond current end of December employment window.
If
So
possible.
that's a
Correct.
recommendation.
If possible.
Yep. Yep.
And at that point, we'll have to find the funding for that
Okay.
because it won't be from the grant.
Well, I understand that, but what I'm saying is that if in our report, and if we're going to share this report and we're saying that we're recommending it, we need to make sure that for us to recommend something and not have the funding from it, it's like telling people you're going to give them a carrot, but you don't give them the carrot. So,
Right.
We need to firm that up.
Okay.
And I would
Okay.
say that Sherry, definitely, I can work with Sherry. We've been buried in back to back budget meetings, trying to hear from our administrative teams, their ideas on budget needs to try to get your budget ready. So it is a priority for her to try to talk about that with me. Today just wasn't the day.
No, I understand.
But we
Okay,
do have some
Mrs.
time next week when really it's just Sherry and I. So we're going to try to find a day and not let anybody know we're in district and just talk.
Okay, Mrs. Bruno, I'll go back to Mrs. Bruno.
This is along the lines of communication, and I think some of the discussion was about families reporting positive cases, and I think it's not entirely clear what the flow of information is from the health district to the school nurses to that public reporting. So that may be something that in the communication, and one of the communications is addressed, because I think it might happen differently in different regions of the state.
Okay, I'm confused, and I'll let, if you could explain to me a little bit better so I understand, but I'm not going to try to answer Mrs. Bruno, but a communication to the parents.
So basically my question is, do the cases get reported to the district by the health district, or do the families report their results to the school district and they report them to the health district?
Okay,
I don't think that's clear.
Okay, Mrs. Bennett, if you would answer that question.
Sure. So like we stated before, we were finding out cases when we were in school based on our follow-up. If we've sent somebody home or people were reporting because kids were absent, that there was a positive case. We find that since we've been out now, we've only been finding out if kids say it to their teachers or if kids report it, especially the high school age, we're finding out because they're telling other kids in the class that they're positive. But what happens is then I get the result and then I go to the health department and we try to confer, but the health department is still like a week behind. So I normally find out positive cases before they do, and I tip them off and then they go and research it, but they get theirs up to, I would say they're still not getting their results for 7 to 10 days after, which isn't helpful for us because of the quarantining and if there were an outbreak. So we do try to confer. Every time we get a positive case, I report it to Michael and Vonda, but I also have to go above them to the DPH and report to the state. So every single day I have to report if there's a staff member, if there's a student, and basically I'm just taking our own acquired information. If teachers are sharing it with me and I'm researching it. I'm reaching out to the families and saying, was somebody positive? Are you guys okay? Is there anything you need? And sometimes they say they need groceries and then we make arrangements for them. So we are researching it. We're not just taking their word, but I could tell you that I know the numbers I don't think it's being reported accurately since we've been out, and rightfully so. People probably feel like that it doesn't really affect anybody in school, so therefore they don't want it to be out there. But it is very important because it gives us a range on the community and the numbers and where we're at. Is it kids? Is it around us? So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's supposed to be the nurses are getting the information and then we're conferring with the DPH, the Department of Health, but we're getting it way before them. We are conferring, but at which point a lot of times the quarantine period is over.
So is the contact tracing happening from you or is the contact tracing happening from the Department of Public Health?
So all contact tracing related to school is me. So anytime there's a positive student or staff member, I do the contact tracing within our district. I get all the names, then, a certain radius, the amount. Then I take my data and I confer with Jessica, who's the director. We go over the information and, if I had any questions, we discuss that. And then they send a letter to confer everything that I've already told them. So I give all the information and answer questions about quarantine, isolation, all that. What is the period? And then Jessica follows up with a written letter from them.
Okay.
Okay, go to Mr. Champagne for your third.
I'm good for now. Most of the stuff in the FAQ kind of answered the things I have.
Mr. Garfalo.
No, sir, no questions.
Mrs. Harmling.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Harmeling. I just want to stress that for me personally, I find it critically important that money is found to keep the health aides at each school. Excuse me, I'm healthy, I'm fine. If we're saying we're going to try to bring back students, even though the coronavirus is still here and in our midst, it is just, we cannot also say we're going to have less medical staff and medical help in our schools. So we have to find that money. And I'm worried because it's 12/21 right now. And if these health aides are only going to get paid through the 31st of the year, I mean, they could have already accepted jobs. So I think it's mission critical, even to the extent that if other board members agree, we pass a motion. There has to be something else that we have to give up because it's not as great as a priority as our health aides in the buildings. So that's it for me. Not a question, but a comment. So thank you.
Thank you. I agree with you. Mr. Hatfield. Mr. Hatfield.
Sorry, I was trying to turn the mute off. Jay Hatfield. Again, I think if Mrs. Tenza could update some of the FAQs with some of these questions and put it on the website, I think that'd be great. I guess that's not a question to Mrs. Harmling's point, it's a comment. Because again, the more information we get out there, the better. And the bus thing, just to clarify for people that, we are going to go back to the regular bus routes. And I know I'm going to circle back to Mrs. Holmes with the bus monitors, but does this mean it's more imperative for us to really put that back out there? Or is that something, to Mrs. Harmling's point, about keeping the health aides. We weren't too successful with the bus monitors, but is that something we're going to need more now than maybe we did before? Thank you.
I would assume that we would need more, but if I remember correctly, and Mrs. Holmes or Mrs. Tenza can answer me, there was the difficulty in locating or hiring bus monitors.
That's correct. There is a shortage out there, and we can't find them.
They're
But
not
we can
lined,
certainly
they're not lined
repost.
up.
We can certainly repost.
Yes.
Of course we can, but I'm just
No,
telling
no.
you that just like bus drivers, there is a shortage. So
That's a
I'm not
difficult,
sure what to do about that problem.
that's a difficult position.
Yes.
I mean, those of us that have been in the business know that, and even all parents know that's a tough position.
Yeah. Well, I just got off the phone with All-Star, the director of operations, and she said people don't want to work. She said it as soon as they hear that students are coming back, they don't want to drive bus. So they quit. And so she's having a hard time keeping people for that reason. She's been working diligently and make sure that she maintains a staff, but they're just not out there.
So then, Mr. Schmal, can I have a quick follow-up?
Go ahead.
So do we have a contingency plan then? I guess if we aren't able to fulfill the routes to begin with, are we going to just go back to the hybrid routes, or do we have a contingency plan there, I guess?
We have the original routes all in place. We saved that on a database, so that's not an issue. We can reinstate that. I just don't know, we're going to have to work with it, work with the model and see what happens. And phase in a fix for it. I just don't know any other alternative if we can't get bus monitors. We're certainly going to try again. That's not an option. We'll put the posting out there, and I've been asking different business managers if they have successfully got bus monitors as well, and they haven't either. So I don't know if you want to say anything else, Vonda, but right now it's just going to have to be, original bus routes to start. And then as things progress, more students come back. Like we had talked about, if there was one bus that was overloaded and one half full, we would redo the routes to accommodate that and make sure that we don't have a bus that's over capacity.
We don't have a wealth, this is Mrs. Tenza, we do not have a wealth of substitute bus drivers, so we are heavily dependent upon nice, healthy bus drivers in order to get our students to school and home safely.
Sorry, I just want to clarify though. I think my question was in regards to, you mentioned that some of the bus drivers are not there. So I'm saying, what's our contingency plan, so to speak, that if that becomes a problem and we can't necessarily provide the transportation, again, I know we want to get kids back in school, but if we don't have the routes of transportation to provide them, what's our contingency there?
That's what I have to discuss with the bus company, what the contingency is, what's the next step. Right now, she said currently Seymour has a full staff of bus drivers and they're ready to go back when we are.
Yep.
Matter of fact, they know the 19th is the date that we're going back in. So they're ready to do that.
Okay, Mr. Hatfield. Okay, Mr. Kubik.
No additional questions from me, Ed.
Okay, Mrs. Nasteriak.
No, I'm fine.
Mr. Stanek.
No questions, but again, a comment. Again, I want to reiterate what I mentioned back in September and several times during the fall. The health and safety of our children and our staff are all paramount in whatever we do in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stanek. Okay, I will ask if there are any additional questions from any board members. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay. Thank you very much, Mrs. Tenza, and Mrs. Bennett and Mr. Boyle for explaining to us. And also thank your other colleagues
Sorry,
for
Mr.
working and preparing this. Yes, Mrs. Tenza.
Through the board chair, thank you. Just 2 things. One would be, I had heard Mr. Headfield, great suggestion to add the additional questions. I wasn't taking notes on these additional questions, and our board secretary is actually off for the next few days, if not next week. So what I'd like to do is submit the FAQs that I have, and if I can remember any of the other questions and answers, I'll add them, and I can certainly add to it when I receive her notes. I'm just not sure I'll receive them tomorrow.
Okay, Mr. Hatfield? Okay.
Thank you. And then I would just like to say that, we appreciate the board's support of our plan, and it would have been completely impossible to do without the immediate and thorough response of the leadership team that I mentioned.
Okay. And I forgot Mrs. Holmes to thank Mrs. Holmes also.
Yeah. Welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Moving right along.
Mrs. Tramello?
Yeah. Oh, yes, Mrs. Harmelin.
If I could, I would like to make a motion to accept the extension phases of the Seymour Public Schools reopening plan as discussed at the meeting.
Okay, I will refer to Mr. Stanek, but I'm not sure we can do that. Is that correct, Mr. Stanek, parliamentarian?
In reviewing the agenda does not call for action, only discussion.
I thought that you could make a motion if it's on point with what's on the agenda, that the agenda did not have to specifically cite a motion or an action. Just in the matter of the course of business, you can make a motion if something is on the agenda already. Is that not the case?
Mr. Stanek?
Under Robert's rules, I agree with you, Ms. Harmeling. However, the FOI Commission is very, very strong in its opinions and its decisions that the agenda should include action when we're going to take action.
Through the chair.
Okay.
Ed, through the chair, can I just clarify something? So on the agenda, this item is listed under discussion and possible action. So I just didn't know if Mr. Stanek saw that or if that changes it.
Mr. Stanek?
Item A, 2A.
I'm just talking about 2 in general, just talks about discussion and possible action under all 3 items.
But then there's,
Mr. Chairman.
If I may.
Wait a minute, Mr. Stanek is speaking.
If I may, Fred Stanek. You present a dilemma because A talks about discussion, B talks about discussion, and then C has discussion and possible action. So there's a delineation. I guess it can't hurt. This is nothing that's really requiring action other than an acceptance of a report.
Right.
But I mean, it's the agenda is ambiguous. It should not be written that way.
Thank you for the critique, Mr. Stanek.
Through the chair, Mr. Champagne, and then I'll go.
But there's a motion on the table. It should be seconded, or we should move on.
Oh, well, then through the chair, maybe we have board counsel here. We could ask his opinion.
That was going to be my suggestion.
I was waiting for that. I don't have the agenda in front of me at the moment. Can somebody just read me what it says again?
Okay, it says we have number 2, discussion and possible action. Then under that, there is A, and it has discussion of data-driven action plan to present ways and ideas to get as many students back to school as soon as possible. Then there's B.
So it just has discussion, but yeah, I mean, to Mr. Stanik's point, that is ambiguous. The point is that you're supposed to let the public know that there might be an action item. Given the ambiguity, I'm not sure, unless the action is critical, given the ambiguity, arguably the public would not know for sure whether there would have been an action, and maybe out of the abundance of caution, I would not vote on it unless you felt the action was critical.
And just for further information, Mr. Dugas, our next meeting is January 11th, which is prior to the January 19th target date. I don't know if that helps.
Well, it's certainly, I mean, there's always the possibility of a special meeting, but I understand nobody's going to want to do that during the holiday. I think arguably you don't need board action to approve it, but given the time constraints, why don't we go ahead and do that and take our chances with the ambiguity?
Okay. All right. So, Mrs. Harmling, if you would please repeat your motion.
So I was thinking about getting them the LLB.
Yeah,
Ms.
I'm sorry.
Harmon?
Am I on mute?
No, I can hear you now.
Okay, so someone has background noise going on. I don't know if it's if everyone else can hear it. Okay, so my motion was, I just have to flip back to the plan so I can get the exact language. I'd like to make a motion to accept the extension phases of the Seymour Public Schools reopening plan as discussed at the December 21st meeting.
Okay, is there a second to that motion? I need a second to the motion, please.
I'll second it. This is Kristen Bruno.
Okay. Any further discussion needed? Okay, hearing none. Mrs. Bruno.
This is Kristen Bruno. I vote yes.
Mr. Champagne.
Ms. Champagne, gonna vote no. I think there's still too many loose ends we need to tie up with budgets and health aides and stuff.
Okay, Mr. Garofalo. Mr. Garofalo, how do you vote?
Jim Garofalo abstain.
Okay, Ms. Harmling.
Mrs. Harmling votes yes, and just so the board knows that I use the word discuss, not as presented, because I do recognize that there are still things to be wrapped up. So just wanted to point that out. So I vote yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, Mr. Hatfield.
Jay Hatfield, no.
Okay, Mr. Kubik.
Peter Kubik votes yes.
Mrs. Nesteriak.
Beth Nesteriak, yes.
Mr. Stanek.
Kurt Stanek, yes.
And Mr. Stramello votes yes. So let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 yeses if I count right. Let me count again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, 5 yeses, 2 noes, and 1 abstention. But that's not right. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Mr. Finello?
Oh, 6 yeses. I'm sorry. 6 yeses. Got it. Okay, so the motion passes 6-1. All righty. Item B, I'm going to ask for a motion to postpone Discussion on a request from the Associate Superintendent to the January 11th meeting.
So moved. Chris Champagne.
Second, Jay Hatfield.
Okay, seconded by Jay. Okay. Mrs. Bruno.
Chair, are you going to call for any discussion?
Oh, I'm sorry. Any discussion? Thank you, Mrs. Bruno. Would you like to discuss it, Mrs. Bruno?
I'm just wondering the reason for postponing.
Okay, there was a request for this to possibly go into an executive session. So I spoke to our parliamentarian and he thought the best thing for us to do would be to postpone it. Any other discussion? Okay, Mrs. Bruno, how do you vote?
Kristen Bruno, I vote yes.
Okay, Mr. Champagne,
Chris Champagne, yes.
Mr. Garofalo,
Jim Garofalo, yes.
Ms. Harmling,
Ms. Harmon votes yes.
Mr. Hatfield,
Jay Hatfield votes yes.
Mr. Kubik.
Peter Cubic votes yes.
Okay, Mrs. Nesteriak,
Beth Mysteriak, yes.
Mr. Stanek,
Fred Stanek votes yes.
and Mr. Stramello also votes yes. Motion carries unanimously. Next item on the agenda is to move to executive session. Who makes the motion?
Make a motion, Jay Hatfield, move to enter executive session for discussion of matters requiring attorney-client protected legal analysis from board counsel and to invite attorney Floyd Dugas to attend.
Second, Chris Champagne.
Chris Champagne seconds it.
Yes, sir.
Any discussion? Okay, Mrs. Bruno,
Kristen Bruno, yes.
Mr. Champagne,
Chris Champagne, yes.
Mr. Garofalo,
Jim Garofalo, yes.
Ms. Harmling,
Mrs. Harlan, yes.
Mr. Hatfield,
Jay Hatfield, yes.
Mr. Kubik,
Peter Cubic, yes.
Ms. Nesteriak,
Beth Mysteriak, yes.
Mr. Stanek,
Fred Stanek, yes.
Mr. Stramello, yes. Motion passes 9-0 at approximately 8:21. Okay, so now we need to leave this and we need to go to the other Zoom connection, correct, Mrs. Tenza?
Yes, and once I let everybody in, I will leave. My question is, do you need to come back out into this session
Well,
for any reason?
Mr. Stanek or Mr.
Yeah, you would have to come out and adjourn the meeting. So yes, at a
Okay.
minimum.
That's what I thought so, but
Okay,
Mrs.
so,
Senza,
yep.
if you send me your information, I'll send you a message when we're ready, and then you could tell Mr. Martin to turn it back on.
I will absolutely do that. Remember last time there was a lapse due to inactivity, so just be aware that I may need to send another link.
Do we have a link to this executive session already?
I did email it to everybody except for Mr. Dugas.
Okay, it's from you though.
So it should have come in a Zoom. Did it go?
Yes, I received it. Mr. Dugas received it as well.
Okay.
okay, so
7:03.
we're all leaving this right now.
We're gonna try. Okay.
I think we're just waiting. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Are we back open to the public also?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you.
I think Mr. Stramello joined the wrong session.
Jay, I'm only giggling because you are.
I don't know. I don't know how it's possible though. Let me send.
When it comes to technology.
You're doing okay there, Mr. Stanek.
Well, thank you, Ms. Harmeling.
Mr. Martin, could you please resend Mr. Stramello the original link again?
I just sent it to him
Okay, thank you.
with the hyperlink. I know that's helpful.
Suffice it to say, Mr. Stanek, this has been a learning experience for many of us these past few months.
No question about it. Floyd, I was having some anxiety a few weeks ago when I was going to have a remote trial. I've been in the remote hearings, of course, but not a full trial. But then we settled, so anxiety went away.
Well, I'm in the middle of about 4 or 5 very contentious termination hearings before the State Board of Mediation and Arbitration, one with a teacher through Zoom, and it's going better than I would have expected, frankly. A few blips. Connectivity, I think, is the biggest problem. You know, if you have a witness and they don't have good reception, boy, it really throws a monkey wrench.
He says it's not working.
I guess we could
The kid might have went to dinner or something.
we could just adjourn the meeting. Really, I don't think there's
That's a
anything
good point.
else. Yeah.
Okay.
So, is Mrs. Doherty back with us, or do you want to write it down? Or
I don't think she was.
I'll write it down.
so, do we have a motion to adjourn?
This is Kristen Harmeling.
We
So
came out of
moved.
executive session. I'm sorry, we came out of executive session at 9:44. We'll say.
I'd like to make.
We have a motion.
Yes, Mrs. Harmeling makes a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, Peter Kubik.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any questions?
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Yes, Merry Christmas.
everyone.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Diaz.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.